Okay, welcome to the session Human Aspects of Software Engineering 1. We have 3 beautiful talks here, and we are happy to have you here. The talks will be for 5 minutes. After all the talks, we will have discussion for the remaining of the time, and I'm looking forward to it very much. And maybe we can now start with the first talk by Lucy Hunt. It is a review of how whistleblowing is studied in software engineering, if it is studied and how it is studied, and what are the implications of the research and practice. Please, Lucy, start as you are ready.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lucy. I'm a final year PhD student at Lancaster University, and I work in the IT industry as well. I've been there for 20 years as a software engineer and business analyst. And I'm presenting our paper on a review of how whistleblowing is studied in software engineering and the implications for research and practice. Our motivation. In 2018, Christopher Wylie made revelations about Cambridge Analytica's unlawful use of personal data. By contrast, at Volkswagen, concerns about software designed to mislead emission tests were not publicly raised. Harmful software has resulted in loss of life, societal and environmental damage, alongside economic losses from fines and sale embargoes. These big stories, along with my personal smaller stories and experiences, motivate our research. The goal of our research is to understand how practitioners and organisations make disclosures about perceived or actual harmful software or practices, with a particular focus on those who find it necessary to blow the whistle. We explore the software engineering literature through 3 research questions. What are the prevalent whistleblowing themes? How is whistleblowing researched? And what are the gaps and concerns for research and practice? We looked for items specifically about whistleblowing and about software engineering projects and products, based on the title, abstract, and keywords. We performed searches on the IEEE, ACM, and Scopus databases. We applied checks for software engineering relevancy and inclusion and exclusion criteria that gave us a final list of 60 items from the last 50 years. Through 2 rounds of independent coding, we jointly came up with 6 primary coding themes as shown. Personal and social factors identified as the top primary theme. It includes sub-themes of individual values, personal motivation, and the mum effect. The mum effect is described as keeping quiet about known issues or harmful situations, and was found in students, practitioners, and IT auditors. This is concerning given the complexity of software systems and the technical knowledge required to recognise, support, and evidence issues. So how was it researched? Natural setting items featured most highly in the review. The majority of these were position and opinion and technology solution papers based on in-field reports or observations. There were also a significant number of scenario-based experiments contributing to understanding factors that affect individual responsibility and their intention to report bad news on projects. Software bugs, misunderstood requirements, system limitations, poor testing, outsourced work, and third-party code were examples of backstories to these scenarios. Situational factors such as professionalism, time urgency, harm of consequences, proximity to victims increased the likelihood of reporting bad news. And regarding the gaps and concerns, one of our major research concerns was the lack of representation of teams, disclosure recipients, and other groups involved or aware with harmful situations. We therefore have opportunities for future research. Studying modern software engineering stories presented as comparable case studies would help us map out and understand how whistleblowing escalates and how the wider software engineering community is or could be involved. For emerging themes from these stories to be mapped onto existing social identity and whistleblowing models, for example, which could be useful for understanding the actions and reactions to harmful situations found in software engineering teams. Stories could also provide case studies for education and practice to help address the perception that reporting harm or wrongdoing is a matter of individual responsibility. And we conclude with some implications for practice. Firstly, to find approaches that can help a more timely identification and mitigation of harm. Secondly, to find mechanisms for improving the effectiveness and personal safety of harm reporting, in particular to reduce the burden on individuals and organisations seeking to produce evidence in support or defence of whistleblowing actions. Finally, we look to professional bodies for support and advice for practitioners finding themselves in harmful situations. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Lucy, for the great talk. We will postpone the questions to the discussion afterwards. Now, this beautiful talk from Isabella about using Scratch, or understanding Scratch as a social network, and what are the topics and what is the sentiment that is usually seen in this Scratch network.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. So I'm Isabella Grossel from the University of Passau in Germany. I'm in the second year now of my PhD, and today I will show you that Scratch is more than just a programming platform for beginners, and that it can be analyzed like a social network. But to begin with, so how can social networks and Scratch link together? We've learned from recent events such as the Black Lives Matter movement that societal issues have indeed an impact on the software engineering community. And we see this phenomenon not only in a professional context, but also when we're browsing through the projects on the educational platform Scratch. And then we are realizing, or at least I was realizing, what do we really know about the interests of the young programmers? What are they talking about in their projects? And since the environment is similar to a traditional social media with liking, loving, sharing, and commenting, we want to extract semantic information of those projects and to see to what extent societal issues have an impact on Scratch projects. And so the first question we wanted to answer were which topics can be extracted, and therefore we used a first-time application of automated text analysis using machine learning techniques, Top2Vec in this case, for over 100,000 projects. And the second one was we wanted to see, okay, which social behavior exists in the Scratch comments, and therefore we analyzed with a multi-class sentiment analysis tool the project comments. And what we did get was a lot of topics with music and animals, kind of what we expected, but also topics with a lot of noise, and topics with, as you can see here, proper names. For example, there's a YouTube channel, it's a video game or a television network. And you can also see the term COVID as the term with the highest weight in this topic. And this indicates that the extraordinary event of the COVID pandemic is being processed in some extent or in some form in the user comments and the user projects. But we also see like common everyday life scenarios such as holidays and celebrations. Also, we saw, besides those real-world scenarios, many topics dealing with references to net and pop culture. You can see Pokemon or Minecraft for the older people of us that are popular games for kids. You also can see Harry Potter and Disney. And this implies that children transfer their favorite free time activities to a programming setting. We also identified some real abstract worlds, such as rather gloomy fantasy worlds with dragons and Godzilla in it, and also some more shiny worlds with unicorns in it. For the sentiment, so the good news first, the majority of the projects is really positive, so Scratch is a positive community. And it's dominated by the term thanks, which is of course a sign of appreciation. We also see some strong positive words here, and acronyms like LOL, laughing out loud, or XD, which are a sign of youth language, and which is due to the age of the Scratch user and can only be interpreted with this certain age clause. For the negative comments, here you can see, for example, the word people, which cannot be inferred in the context. However, we also see BLM, which means Black Lives Matter, and also the term Floyd, police and black. So this is also referring to the event, which was the reason for the movement in the USA. And it's again a strong indicator that to some extent societal events are reflected. So for next, we want to see if there are controversial topics are also being processed in the comments, so that they are discussed more controversially in the community. And we will also determine from the comments whether a project receives a lot of positive or negative feedback because of the topic itself, or maybe because of the implementation. And this would be not just beneficial for societal aspects, but also for the computer science education point of view to design specific tasks. And I'm looking forward to the discussion after the next talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella. The last talk we have in this session is nominated for a distinguished paper, and it is by Lucas, and it is about effective leadership in agile software development teams.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, I'm Lucas. I'm a senior lecturer at Chalmers and University of Gothenburg. I wrote this paper with Paul Raff, which is at Dalhousie University in Canada. I came back to the university in November. Before that, I was involved in the agile transformation for 3 years at Volvo Cars with 750 teams something. So that is my. So this topic is very interesting to me, both from a practical and a research perspective. In my research from while I was a PhD student, investigating the group dynamics of agile teams, leaders and leadership always came up. Good leaders or leaders that leave the teams alone, or team leadership, or in agile we have no leaders. And I reflected on this for a long time. Why do they say that instead of having better leaders? So what is different here? And also, why is traditional management? Many people believe that leadership and management is important. Aspects of it are definitely important. But why is traditional management not agile? Well, we have decision hierarchies and we have people being responsible for quite a lot of things. If we take the Volvo Cars example, you have some managers who has been in jail for some things years, 100 years old company. So if we're responsible, we want some kind of control, and having control over many people is of course impossible, but we can through different ways get some kind of an illusion of control. When it comes to this paper, it's about effective leadership. It's not about good or bad leaders for a reason, but we find in just 3 points. Okay, what is leadership in agile teams? Well, agile teams share leadership work rather than having an individual leader, and they build a sense of belonging and common purpose across and within organizational functions. And by functions here we mean like HR, finance, business, those types of functions, organizational functions. And they adapt their processes to the different culture that exists simultaneously within a single organization. And the large companies that were in our sample, they usually have some kind of an agile transformation. They did something differently, and then they defined the need for change, and then they try to be more agile in their processes. So the participants compared traditional leadership with what they saw was needed now. The method was semi-structured interviews, 13 professionals that identify as agile leaders in different roles, 10 different companies. And we, of course, investigate the perception of agile leadership because we asked them. I will go through this a bit quickly, but it's we figured out that what the participants said about agile leadership is in line with contemporary definitions of leadership, mostly in psychology research on leadership. So a couple of examples here that in Cranach on the 4th bullet point here, even defines leadership as a function of group action. So it's gone from having individual leaders to seeing leadership as a property of a team and a drive of driving teams forward. And that's a lot in line with the agile definitions of leadership. So for example, less control and direction and more the leaders' developmental and instructional capabilities applied over time. All these are taken from non-software development contexts. So if we connect these findings, well, the first one is called, of our 3 findings, is called dynamic team leadership in leadership research. So that is that the leadership dynamically is shared, maybe even within the same hour. Some different team members can drive work forward. Build a sense of belonging. It's research as social identities, often in psychology, to create this common purpose across different roles and between different teams as well. And adapt process to different cultures. Culture is something we know for some time, even in software development, that it influences. Organizational culture is very important. And we map this into a model of effective agile leadership. And that's the social identities, dynamic team leadership. So the leadership changes dynamically, and also organizational culture. And the balance of milestone and agile culture is usually what these participants were talking about. All right, I think that was 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. So I'm looking to our beautiful discussion that can start now. We have already 2 very interesting questions in the chat. So we can start with them, or maybe Lutz, you would like to turn your mic on and speak up.
These word clouds, I found them sort of intriguing because first of all, I wasn't quite sure what the role of this, we look at positive terms and negative terms is. And the second, it wasn't obvious to me in all the cases why some terms were on one side or the other. In particular, people on the negative side, people to me sounds totally neutral. Don't was on both sides. Black Lives Matter, I would say, depends so much on context, how you use it. Can you shed some light on this?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, the project, so each comment was classified by the tool as positive, neutral, or negative. So each sentence in each comment, and then we aggregated so to see which projects are positive or negative. And the word clouds are a summary of those projects. So to see which kind of topics are in the negative and in the positive projects. And here you can see that that's a limitation of our work, because as you mentioned it correctly, there are some misclassified words like don't, which appear in both sides, and they're clearly neutral. But as we always, with the Black Lives Matter issue, it's that the comments itself are negative. So the tool classified it as negative. We manually evaluated over 1,000 project comments to see if it was correct, and it was correct. So therefore we chose this tool. But it depends, as you also correctly stated, on the context. So there were a lot of controversial discussion about the BLM wording, and therefore it was classified, because they said, okay, I hate those movements, or also in contrast, I hate people who are not supporting BLM. So that kind of things. and so it was classified as negative.
So to make sure I got you, the classification was at the comment level, because initially you said sentence, then you said project, and last you said project comment.
Yeah,
So
so
the project comment is the granularity.
yeah, so the project comments a project comment can be like just one sentence and it can be just one word. So it's per comment, and then we aggregate it to the project level, because a project can have one comment or two or hundreds, to see how many projects are positive and how many projects are negative or neutral. Also to see some, in future work, to see some correlations about topics and sentiment. Yeah. So, but because the tools we used, they are trained obviously on social media context, and we are here dealing with Scratch. The age group is 10 to 14, most of them. So that's the writing of kids. And as you know, that's sometimes a little bit difficult to analyze. So there is a lot of things to do. So.
Yeah. Again, to make sure I got you, when you say a project is negative, what you mean is the majority of comments that were attached to the project had a negative sentiment, right?
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Okay. And you haven't actually looked at what the content of the project itself is.
So the project, yeah, we did. See, so you mean correlation between the topic and the comments? Yes, we did, but it wasn't on the paper. But yeah, we did, because we did the manual evaluation of those 1,000 comments, not just to see if the sentiment tool was correctly evaluating, but also yeah, if we saw any connection to the topic. So yeah, and most of the time it did, especially for those controversial topics we identified. One, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, and also some LGBTQ plus topics around there. So yeah, but that's yeah, we wanted to have a follow-up study where we want to see if we can do more, but now it was the first time application, and as you said, there are a lot of noise in it, so we want to reduce that.
Okay, thank you.
What I ask the same question? What topics are more positive, what were more negative? That's maybe you are planning for the next paper, or maybe you can shortly answer as well here if you already know what are the tendencies. But related to this, I asked myself, in Code.org, it is known that the audience is usually more boys than girls, and in comments in forums you have higher activities from boys. You can see it as well on the topics that you showed in your that there are dinos and dungeons and Pokemons and things. So it is maybe topics that are more somehow formed by boys. That would be interesting to see if the sentiment is same for all the topics. There are topics like unicorns and others. Are there more diverse sentiments? Are there more diverse discussions in these topics? Are there somehow interestingly other, and as well there are some forums that are especially for some groups, like for beginners or for girls. Are the sentiments in the groups for beginners, for example, more positive or negative? Is the first experience that the kids have positive? It would be nice. I don't know. Have you observed such differences?
Yeah, I think so. We were wondering kind of the same thing, and we also wanted to see that. So the problem in general is, and we did this again manually to check the validity. But the age and the gender and also the experience, it's self-reported in Scratch. So the kids can share it, but they don't have to. But we are also here on a follow-up study because we wanted to see, okay, are there some gender differences or gender-specific characteristics in the field of the topics? Because as you mentioned with the dinosaurs, maybe they're more stereotypical to boys, or the unicorns more to girls. We also saw this in some courses we did. Yeah, but we have to mine a lot more projects to see if it's how the correlation there is. So also with the experiences, that would be really nice to see if the topics change with more experiences, or what are the really beginner projects all about. So yeah, but for the manual evaluation we did, I can say that so the more common the topics were, like with birthday parties or just one unicorn dancing around, the comments were also some kind of, they were just like great project or hi, or so they were really like trivial, so not really controversial or something, and just like acknowledging it. And yeah, so
It is interesting that kids have discussed in forums such topics as Black Lives Matter, and it's a very interesting observation.
Yeah, we were also really surprised, and when we also, because we want to extend it, also with the US election, we saw that there also were some like advertisement, pro and contra, and yeah, we were really surprised about that it is like really that our kids are dealing with this, not just as they are kids, but also in the programming environment. And I think there's a lot of future work for that. So thank you.
In the Scratch environment, it must be one of the first chances that children have to comment on each other's work and have a, they haven't got Facebook at that age and probably not Twitter. So this is possibly one of the first environments where they've shared their thoughts on other people's code, other people's thoughts, other people's projects.
Yeah, that's certainly a first environment. Yeah, surely, where they can socialize. Was the topic that they were discussing in forum to the project somehow modeled or connected to the project? Was the project already dealing with the topic that was discussed in forum?
Sorry, again, so that you mean that the topic of the project was mentioned in the comments as well?
And when they discussed Black Lives Matter, was the project already about such similar topic, or? Yeah,
most of the time. Most of the times we saw that it was mentioned in the project, because like as you saw at the motivation, there were a lot of projects. But we also saw that sometimes the project topic wasn't at all about BLM, but they just said because the event occurred and they're like, we're supporting it or something like that, or please click on this project, it's about BLM, please support it, something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. We have again some additional questions from Lutz to Agile talk about Agile development. Maybe I will give you a word to proceed with these questions, and Lucas to answer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I see them.
Hi, Lucas.
So, hi.
I like your study very much, and I'm really looking forward to reading the article. You had one point that said where conventional management has leaders as an important topic, Agile says no leaders. And I wonder where you take this claim from.
Yeah, the first slide was my personal experience. It was not details from the paper. What we write in the paper is that traditional management is less stressed in the agile descriptions, and that we have references on. Now that one is one of the most extreme ones I've experienced myself in industry, that we do agile now, so we don't have leaders.
Yeah, so that is a
And that's the-
distorted idea of agile, that people say agile is only when you have no leaders. We must not have leaders, something like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and that I've experienced that many times, that okay, leadership is toned down, but for me that's pretty dangerous, because it's especially if we look at the contemporary definitions of leadership, that is a function of group action or something like that. If we don't talk about leadership in teams, then we lose a very important mechanism that we cannot talk about. So I think that's very dangerous. And I thought that from the beginning. I understand the toning down of command control management. I fully understand that, but go to as far as to say that, no, we don't have leadership in agile teams, I think that's pretty dangerous. So it's
yeah, to me, this resonates with what I hear a lot, that many people's understanding of what agile is about is a vulgarized, oversimplified notion that goes to the extremes. Like, we never write any documentation whatsoever. That's bad. It's always unnecessarily bad. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, and all these are misunderstandings of the Agile Manifesto, I think, that you also mentioned. I mean, it's which one? It's the people and interaction over processes and tools, for example. It doesn't say no processes and no tools.
Yeah.
That's not what it says.
Yeah. Maybe we could come to the second question. I read the 3 points that you found, like, oh yeah, that sounds like competent agile teams working wonderfully in the agile sense. But what was your, how did you collect the base set of what to look at as an agile team and what would not be an agile team?
Yeah, we didn't do that. So we met people that identify as agile leaders and have them talk about agile teams, because it's I mean, this is connected to a lot of my previous research on agile teams, and I set out in my PhD trying to find a measurement of agility, and then I gave up and found mature teams from a group psychological perspective to be the best proxy I could find for the descriptions of agile teams. So they are, from a group psychological perspective, the mechanism, just like you say, the way they, if they get to be agile, they are pretty mature from a psychological perspective. And that's when these, for example, dynamic team leadership, we're having this strong social identity and high levels of team spirit, that I belong to this team. That comes quite late in the team development process. We don't get that on day one when we start to work with people we don't know. So it's my conclusion of that is that, okay, it's like you say, the descriptions of an agile team is actually in many ways a description of a well-functioning team from a psychological perspective. And then they happen to be able to be agile as well. But that's not surprising when I read this literature in social psychology, because the mechanisms of those types of teams imply that they can actually take the mandate and lead themselves in a way that we want agile teams to do as well. So it's a huge overlap between, I think we should use theories from psychology and apply them in software engineering, because some of them might be different. We need to test them out. In our case here, the overlap between descriptions of well-functioning teams in social psychology is to a large extent how we try to build them for them to be agile in the sense we mean when we hope to get agile teams, if you understand what I'm saying. So
let me check whether I got you correctly. So the reason, that's my interpretation, the reason why these 3 statements sound so good, so ideal, is possibly that they weren't won by direct observation, but rather they are the filtered views of agile leaders or self-identified agile leaders of what they perceive agile teams do. which probably means that the teams who don't do this were sort of scratched out by your interviewees and saying, yeah, they weren't really agile. So I only talk about the really good ones. Is that so?
Yeah, or the parts of the teams that starts to work well, because I think Agile promotes self-organization of team apparently, and that's not new. That wasn't new in 2001. There's a lot of research on that in the 90s, for example, what mechanisms need to be in place for self-organization of teams. But it's interesting, like you say, I don't think they excluded the other teams, but they see, all of them see, when an Agile team kicks off, it works really well. And they have, of course, have a spectrum of the teams working really well and other ones. And it's hard to answer that question if they, I don't know if they saw the other ones as not being agile, but they definitely compare them in a way that, okay, we want these agile teams to be with these mechanisms. And these mechanisms are aspects of, a lot of it is mechanisms of well-functioning teams in general, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's I'm not surprised. The Agile Manifesto is it stems from not from research, but from quite practical conclusions. And I would be surprised if that's not based on what was known before in social psychology about how humans build teams, because that was not new in 2001. It's just so hard to get that dynamic in practice on a large scale. And that is, my experience is, when we try to scale up Agile, it's even more difficult getting these close-knitted small teams to get these type of dynamics and get them to take mandate and drive themselves and work in an Agile way is the first step. And then scaling this up is the next step. And that's what I see a lot in the Agile transformation and large scale Agile, because to sync these teams in this way, that also a prerequisite for that is that they are quite mature from a psychological perspective. Otherwise, it's very hard for teams to collaborate well with other teams. If we don't know what we're doing yet and who can do what and have shared mental models of what we're doing, it's pretty hard for us to collaborate well with other teams.
And take responsibility
exactly.
for everything that goes wrong.
Yeah. So it's pretty much dependent on getting the teams up and running in the way that it's described in group psychology and the contemporary research on that as well. And we probably need to understand it a lot more to scale Agile, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if you focus on this aspect of this good functioning teams, that they share the load of leadership and rotate the tasks among themselves based on current competencies or something. So you said in your paper that potential to take this workload on oneself of one member of the team is usually higher if they is actually that's the prerequisite that the member of the team feels that he or she belongs into the team and is part of the team. So in the interviews, have they shared with you something like, what was the history of the team? What was necessary to create this sense of belonging and this openness to take the load of leadership and be initiative and take the responsibility? What was the history of the team previously? What was leading to this good functioning team from the interviews? Not overall.
I understand.
But and second part, have you had an interview something like, when you have working team, what is the future of such team if you have, for example, someone going away or joining another team and someone is coming? This is their ability to absorb these changes and how they deal with it. So, like, what was the history, what led to it, and how such teams work? It is like you don't have to touch such a team. If it once works, don't touch it, or it is able to.
Yeah, let me see if I can remember specifically from the interviews. I mean, I have a lot of experience from a lot of teams, so I have my understanding of this. But the history of, I mean, as I said, it's connected to them being able to take responsibility and mandate and do their thing, and they have been able to do that. And what the participants talk a lot about is that they, one participant particularly said that, okay, when these teams kick off, I could go on vacation for 2 weeks and it doesn't matter. I mean, that's a sign that these teams know what they're doing. They share leadership work. They take responsibility. And then you have other examples where they feel like they need to be very much involved, and there could be many reasons for that. And one reason is in connection to your second question, that if we reorganize all the time, which especially large companies do without taking the team level into account, they just shuffle competences around for some political reason or something else.
Yes.
Then the teams lose a lot of these capabilities, and in the introduction of new members also take a lot of time. We don't feel part of a team on day one. That's also going to take some time. So these mechanisms that they speak about, it's quite dependent on teams being stable, and not only stable, but also that they of course have these other possibilities to develop this. And one classical example is that if you have, and some participants spoke about that as well, if you have some pretty classical command control management, teams tend to not get these then they don't share leadership work, because there's one in power over them that takes the role of a leader and a manager. And micromanagement tends to be that's a clear example of when you don't get the dynamic team leadership in place, for example. So it's quite, but one nuance to it is that the examples of backing off too early, if you put together a team and you just go ahead, self-organize, that tends to not work. So that sometimes works, but not always. So I mean, and that's my experience from my other research as well, that teams that are newly formed and less mature from a psychological perspective, they tend to go, I mean, structure provides safety in the beginning. So then they go, let's use Scrum, and then they go Scrum 100%. But the more mature teams, that in my perception is more agile, they always tailor their own agile process together based on their context, their work, and their competence. It is always a tailored thing to fit, not going 100% for a framework. But that tends to happen in teams that are newly formed.
Yeah, I spoke here with some companies that have this understanding, don't touch functioning teams, and they are caring about them like a precious entity, and another that are distributing people all the time. And there is this question in background: what is management and what is leadership? And that there is if this say that no leaders actually does mean no managers, and what is effective management and what is effective leadership and Scrum process. So that's always in background, what is actually necessary and in which state of the development, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tricky one. I think there's always need to be a manager who has some kind of employee responsibility, but who takes on that role. I mean, in the best examples I've seen of self-organization, these are just formalities, and then people take their responsibility and do their thing. At Volvo Cars, for example, with the agile transformation, it was not only two different cultures alive at the same time, but two different organizational structure. So the line organization is kept with 8 hierarchies of management, and then you try to have the scaled agile frameworks alongside of it. And then people live in 2 different worlds. They have, we're supposed to do this with our mandate and our self-organization. We're supposed to be agile. And then you have the line organization, which has the power that is alive next to it. And that's what is, and I think in the SAFe framework, it's not described how management should work in a clear way. And I think this is usually where scaled agile hits a limit, because you have classical management involvement in a way that we don't get the leverage from being more agile in the way that we would hope. You get some stuff out of it, but so that's a very important. I mean, I think companies have everything to gain. I think, what is leadership? What is management? What is the roles of these, and how do we expect these to work when we try to transform into something? But I think that's where we as I said, I've seen many. Usually, top management understands, and then the teams understand, and then you have a lot of middle management that. And we have to be humble with that, because they build their career on behaving in a different way. We have the illusion of control that I spoke a little bit about that. They have responsibility and they have career paths, and then that is being challenged. Yeah, sorry.
Do you think it would be useful for organizations to think of teams as organizations rather than sets of people of their own organization? An organization, in the sense, they have their own internal control, they have some self-confidence, some competence, they can negotiate with us about how we work together and negotiate with other teams. And the only difference to a micro company is the money flows. But other than that, we treat them like they were a self-contained kind of thing that is separate from us, sort of.
Yeah. And they should have their own money as well, I think, for training. And otherwise, if they have to ask for training and it takes them 6 months to get it because they have to get approval from different budgets, it's not very agile. So I think absolutely. And I think the team level is quite a powerful force with group norms, and it's a powerful entity to get teams together. And I think they already work as their own organization. And I think companies have everything to gain, like you say, from understanding that and being explicit about it, because teams can also quite quickly get some anti-patterns in overall productivity. For example, if they feel like that kicks in sometimes, that okay, we are the best in the world, the best team, and all the teams around us, even in the same company, are not worth so much, and that's not good for the company. So I think being explicit about, okay, this is a small, call it organization, or usually when I think about it, it's like, okay, we need to recognize the team level as an important entity. And that's exactly what I mean with that. That's an organization in itself. And we need to understand that there's a lot to gain from psychology research, I think. How does that work? And how does that work in connection to other teams? So I think absolutely an organization has everything to gain from that. But there's a lot of barriers against it. HR is one example. My experience with HR in Sweden is that in many different companies is that they mostly focus on the individual level, nothing else. In individual careers, individual salaries, individual salary talks, individual one-to-ones. And we need to do that as well, probably, but the team level needs to be in focus. And I think the team level is the most important entity if we want to be agile.
Maybe it does not have to be the same person that is discussing and negotiating on a team level and on an individual level. It needs to be maybe separated in the structure of company.
We have 2 more questions open, but maybe Sebastiano's is already answered. Could you signal?
Yes, Sebastiano is asking a question. Lucas, did you observe or know specific patterns and anti-patterns in leadership in agile development? More generally, what impact a good distributed leadership can have in an agile team? Okay, maybe that's even answers.
Patterns in leadership. Yeah, maybe we discussed that a bit. I think if we focus on leadership, I think the leadership function can be taken on by a role. And I think if we have newly formed teams, they have everything to gain by having a clear leader that suggests we can use this process, and we put together this team because of these reasons, and we think you have these competencies, because that's usually in place. So I think that's the tricky part. The team has everything to gain in the beginning of having some clear leadership and suggestions of how to do things and descriptions, because that creates safety. But then leaders need to back off when the team is ready to lead itself. And that's the tricky part. And I think that's a lot of the misunderstandings that we see, that, okay, leaders try, okay, I'm supposed to back off because agile teams, self-organizing, and then they see when it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for quite many reasons in the beginning. And then you need to be a clearer leader in some sense, not micromanaging, but being clear in defending the principles of collaboration, the agile principles, because you have a lot of, one clear thing I've seen, if you leave teams alone, one clear anti-pattern is that one team member starts to micromanage all the other team members. And that's not what we agreed on either. So then if we see that as we're responsible for have some leading role in the organization, then we need to step in and, okay, this is not how we want collaboration to be in teams. But leaders or managers are usually quite afraid of that, because they think that, oh, we're agile now, so I shouldn't, is that micromanaging? So defending collaboration principles is very important, and we need to do that quite strongly, but not micromanage technical details. So I think that's a tricky one. So we need to behave differently as a leader for teams that are not there yet. And then we can back off, like the example I said about one, if you really get these teams to take off, you can go for a holiday for 2 weeks and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's not the case if you have newly formed teams, for example. I hope I answered some part of it.
Are there some teams that are more difficult to make work, like cross-functional teams, or some product teams, or some teams?
Yeah.
But
I can't
answer on
I can't say I can't say that in general. One problem often, if the team doesn't have the resources of fulfilling the team goal. So they usually need representation across functions to be able to fulfill their team goal. So that's one part of it.
I'm interested when you talk about leadership and if there's conflict within a team. So part of my study is interviewing whistleblowers or people that are speaking up about harmful situations. If there's conflict, there needs to be somebody that helps either escalate it, or if they won't escalate it, people have to find other ways to deal with it. And when they talk about teams that have good leadership, then situations get resolved. And where there isn't strong leadership, or people don't agree with what that individual's saying, they then don't feel part of the team and they have to go outside to find support or power to change the situation, because the team won't change. The team are saying, we're doing this, even though, it might be against standards, professional standards, or values of the organization.
I think that's one of the anti-patterns as well of, it's that's what I meant with teams it's a very strong entity, and it's important part of our personal identity to be part of different social groups in our lives. And if we think that something is wrong, if we have this, it becomes our teams. If they work well, they are social support systems for us. And I think whistleblowing would be something that the team does then, and support each other, because we see that this is wrong. So I would suspect that if they feel excluded and alone, that would be then we don't have the mechanisms that we talk about with these types of mature teams. And I think that's a very interesting connection to whistleblowing, and that stems with conflict as well. These teams that work in these ways, the way that they are described, one thing they have in place is really good conflict resolution techniques. They know how to solve conflict when it happens, and they're very respectful and take responsibility for how they communicate when it comes to that. And I wouldn't think that's in place if in this case you described.
Yeah, I think one of Sorry.
No, Lucy, go.
One of my participants was new to a team, so they joined the team, and some of the team members said there's a problem here, but we don't speak up about it. But because this person was new, coming in with new skills and advice, they took on that issue and to either help change. Well, they actually did blow to a regulator in the end, but there was somebody new coming into the team, helped the team tackle a conflict that they couldn't deal with themselves, partly because they might lose their jobs. There was other pressures of being in a team, and
no, I find that inspiring with minority influence. If we just get the support from someone once in a while, we will stand up for it. So yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, you talk about the history, or somebody you mentioned about the history of the team and how that led to the team being where it was. And that was another thing with people speaking up, was having not been listened to in the past, they felt more strongly about speaking up in the future and helping others speak up. And that then made for, well, it wasn't better teams. There was definitely problems, but solving situations, resolving harmful situations.
That's a very nice connection to the whistleblowing. That I asked myself, what are the conditions and what are the competencies that the software engineers need to have to recognize what is harmful thing, and what conditions make them to speak about it, and this sense of belonging into the team and being part and having this security maybe is one thing. And the second part of questions, what are the competencies and what are the software processes that allow us to recognize harmful designs, and how needs to be developed to be able to recognize what is harmful?
And I think there's looking at it, there's harmful situations, so toxic environment, lack of communication, and maybe some of the other challenges we've talked about. There are issues creating harmful software, so vulnerable, the quality of software, but there's also systems like the Volkswagen case where they went out of their way to create software that defeated emission tests. Yeah, it's I don't know what the answer is. That's why I'm looking into this. It's looking at what situations people find themselves in, why people can't speak up. You know, the mum effect came through several of the studies, and it comes through in practice as well. When I'm talking to my participants, other people are not speaking up. It seems to be somebody coming into the team, or something tips them into having to speak out. But one of the challenges that it seems to be this individual responsibility, and it shouldn't be. It's not how we build software. It's not how systems are connected, and how we can find mechanisms, either professional bodies, whether there's things that they can help with, or the tools and processes that are available to evidence harm. And this is getting into sort of IT expert witness territory.
You said that mum effect is somehow typical for software engineers in your paper, and I asked myself, is it like that? Is it that in other professions, other disciplines, harmful products are easier to recognize?
I don't know if it's about identification. I think Lutz, you asked a question about the types of studies, and the majority of the empirical studies are lab-based experiments, so giving people scenarios to react to, and then they're reporting on their intention to speak up about harmful situations, and that shows from students, practitioners, IT auditors, that people, even in the intention, that they're not keen to. It's not what people do. And also there's some combined setting studies, so ones that were experiments, but also they interviewed IT auditors, and even IT auditors whose role is to speak up about situations are being suppressed, they're being threatened, or they're deciding not to speak up because it's not the answer that their manager wanted or that the team wanted to hear. So it definitely happens in practice. The papers in there indicate both from the experiments and also in practice, talking to whistleblowers who didn't speak up. And that's what led my motivation. Is I've seen harmful situations where I've worked, and I couldn't understand why nobody else was saying anything. And when you start to bring it up, you start to be, you feel people bristling up against you, and it's like, why can't we talk about this, and why can't we do something about it? And my past is that I've spoken up, and this is why I'm doing this research, to look at what other people do and what situations lead to it, and how can we make people aware that these are things we can talk about, and who can we talk to.